Hello world! Patricia O'Connor and Frida, Reba, Dorsey here. We are at Frida's place tonight. This is one of our get back into the swing of things. This is Tuesday night at Frida's place, and this, like I said, we're getting back into the swing of things. I took a week because I wasn't feeling it for a week. Sinuses, short story long, incredibly fabulous weather. The plants rebounded like it was spring. My allergies rebounded almost as bad as spring. I took a few days off to get over it, mostly slept. But for that was the first week in like 3 that something catastrophic didn't go on. So that was, we would just also look at that and go, well, we needed the rest. So we did that. Tonight's show is one that I've been looking forward to doing for about a couple of weeks now. It's actually a true story, a couple of weeks now. I've been saving this one up. Plus I've been doing a little bit, I've been lifting a finger on this one. I've been doing some research and some background information and trying to find out how many people were having the same kind of experiences and stuff. So tonight's video is not going to be about a cork bark oak. It's not a video about a Quercus suber, although it could be. I just wanted something bonsai to hang in. In fact, it's going to be probably more horticulture than bonsai, and info, and maybe a little rant too. I'm not sure. Hopefully not. But tonight's show is going to be about soil, substrate, potting soil, akadama, all of that, the ins and outs. What is it that's good about soil? What's the downsides to soil? What is potting soil? What are the good sides to potting soil? What is it? Where is its place in all of this? And then all the other things that kind of go along with it. And this may take a minute. This may just take a minute. So if you need to, pause, get comfortable, get that cup of cocoa or tea or coffee, or I have my coffee. I have some Dutch chocolate milk with espresso shots, which are kind of a favorite around my house because I don't have to make nothing. I used to go to a lot of trouble anyway. I used to go to a lot of trouble to make a really killer chicory coffee, and then I would try to calm down this volatile cocktail with whole canned cream. Yeah, Pat was looking to get fat. But now I just add shots of this, add a shot of that, and it comes out great. Cheers. Also, because this may take a minute, before we get started, I would like to say, welcome back, Sam Doc. Those of you who don't know the Aussie bonsai bloke, you should. His videos were a wealth of information. Whenever I first got into bonsai, he was probably one of the ones whose info I leaned on a lot. At the time, I think we both had some oaks in common, and I had some olives that I don't have now. I gave them away. But wanting to know more about olives and stuff, I started watching his videos very, very early on, and I learned, he is just a master at pruning, and several, like last night's video was on bottle brush. The reason I say this is Sam's been away, and he's been away for a minute. He's been gone about a year. So back, whatever that means. Now, he said we're going to do one and see how it goes. That's all of us. We're all doing one and seeing how it goes, but I also kind of know where he's coming from. But I would recommend that everybody who didn't know that he was back to go check out Sam's spot, which is the Aussie Bonsai Bloke. And if you haven't, then you probably should. And there's a wealth of information there to be had from somebody who it was really good. It was really, really good. No fooling, Sam. It was really good to see you again. Okay, tonight's show. We're going to talk about soil. When I was a kid and dinosaurs roamed the earth, I would go with my parents to the nurseries, and you would see piles of things at some part of the nursery. I mean, they had plants everywhere, you know, but there would also be like a pile of clay, a pile of sand, a pile of lava rock, a pile of this for your rock garden, and then a pile of manure. And before you got out of the car, the parents would usually say, "This is not king of the mountain time. In fact, stay off of those. They make money off of those piles. They don't want to spread out. And one of them is manure, and we're not going to tell you which one. Stay off all of them." Like I wouldn't gonna know the minute I climbed the manure mountain which one that was. But the point was, what I didn't see in the 60s was bags of potting soil. That didn't come along until later. And so now, a lot of times, we go to a nursery or we go someplace and we buy a plant, and not just bonsai, but we buy a plant and bring it home, and maybe it stays in that pot, and it seems to be doing fine. So a couple of months down the road, maybe we spray it for bugs or something to make sure it's still doing good. Maybe when we start fertilizing something else, we give it a little shot, you know, and it seems to be doing fine. Maybe you live someplace where winters are harsh and you're not planning on, you know, you just buy things to add color and life to your life in spring and in summer, and then winter comes and everything goes ka-choo, and there's not enough room in the house for stuff, and it dies in the house anyway. So, you know, maybe that's some people's existence with plants. In California, even our stuff that is supposed to die every year can go all winter and find itself hanging in there the next year. And a lot of times, genetically, it's going to be leaning on the tired end of shot. But if you want to resurrect its health or something, more power to you. You know, I mean, that's we're just talking perennials and stuff. You know, things that you just kind of bought to make a quick bed out of, so that you would have a little color in spring. But along the way, we started messing with potting soil, and everybody seems to make their own version of potting soil now, and that's kind of replaced what we see that used to be the big piles of sand and the big piles of clay and the big piles of bone meal and the big piles of, you know, all the other stuff. So what is potting soil? You know, I work at a hardware store. We have a greenhouse. I can go through the greenhouse and flip over all the bags and take a picture of the ingredients if I wanted to troll them and read it off to you, which I did. I absolutely did. And, you know, going over and reading that, what you will not see is soil. It doesn't have any potting soil, doesn't have much, if any, in the way of actual soil in it. What it has is lumberyard materials, fibrous tree parts that are shredded before they start cutting trees for lumber. You know, some of their byproducts, some mulch, some other forms of mulch, some microbes, and a lot of dead matter, a lot of dead tissue. Now what is soil? Soil's not in itself isn't necessarily alive, because if I were to say what is actual soil, the one word overgeneralization would be quartz in all its forms. Soil is sand or silt or clay and whatever elements that area bleeds into that, plus some microbes and some organic matter. That's basically your soil. You go, well, how about that rich, dark, form, that black farm soil? That's so good. If you look at the soil that's growing the best crops on this farm in California, and then you go to the best farms in Idaho or the best farms in Hawaii and all that, and you pull up all their soils, you're going to see they're all different colors. Some of them are grayish. Some of them are like hard black, like that rich form. Like, why is that soil so black? Come to find out, when you analyze that stuff, the basic ingredients, they all seem to be high in a couple of little things that plants love, and they all seem to have that in common. That doesn't seem to be any big mystery. That color that we get hung up on, as little as 2% ash will make soil go just as black at night. And that probably gives it a little bit of ash. That's another way of saying carbon or something. That probably gives it a little bit of kick. Volcanic ground and stuff is good. It's good to grow in. But that's really what you're looking at there. The California soil looks gray. And we know this place was geologically active for years. But the soil that's doing some of the best farming, and it wasn't trucked in, it was just, what they have there. And it looks gray. If you bring a jar of it and look at it, just right out of that bazillion-dollar crop, it's gray looking. But it's going to have it's mostly silicon, sand. If you take sand and grind it up finer, it's silt. If you add silt to iron or other elements, and then do something to it, and press it and all that, you get clay. So substrate, things that aren't soil but we could add to soil that we use a lot. Akadama, that's clay. Perlite, okay, if you take sugar, heat it, and spin it, you get cotton candy. If you take lava rock, heat it, and spin it, you get perlite. If you take clay and heat it and spin it, wait a minute, I forgot a word, you get pumice. That's where those basic ingredients come from. At the end of the day, that all comes down to quartz. Either pounded into sand, pounded into silt, or pounded into silt and then pressed into other elements to become red clay or yellow clay or something like that. So, when it comes to potting soil, 50s and 60s, companies that used to sell us fertilizer started selling us potting soil. And a couple of things happened with that. One, it's lightweight. A 5-gallon bucket full of potting soil weighs almost, literally almost not a whole lot. You can easily carry that with one hand. A 5-gallon bucket of soil, of regular soil, weighs almost as much as a 5-gallon bucket of cement. I mean, it's heavy. It's quite heavy. So and it's just basically mulch. Now, what does potting soil do well? It grows biobes. It grows microbes. It will help with the mycorrhiza end of this, but so would adding mycorrhiza to your soil or your substrate before you plant. And the point where I said that it's lighter, it makes it easier to do something with the plant if it's in potting soil or whether if it's in a really, really heavy pot of actual substrate. But when you look at potting soil and you look at it close, you're seeing shards and shreds. You're just basically seeing shredded material that is rotting, it's dying, and it's breaking down. And as it breaks down, it feeds microbes. You want to throw some fertilizer in with those microbes. Those microbes will eat that fertilizer. They live and they die because they live and they die pretty fast. And the plant takes those up. Most plants do not absorb fertilizer or plant food directly from the soil. There are few, not many. The way I had it described to me was they were describing a few more advanced. I don't really know if evolution doesn't always march in the steps we think it does. Sometimes dumber takes over for a while, or sometimes shorter and slower, but uses less energy or something. So I don't really know exactly how they meant it. But in this case, they were saying that for broccoli, I believe was one of the things they mentioned, can take fertilizer directly out of the soil. A lot of other things, like my Japanese black pines, they're going to rely on a symbiotic relationship between some mycorrhiza, which I think is actually a description of the process. But yet I digress. That's a spore or a mushroom that is helping the tree to get it the nourishments it needs, because it's not made to take in those elements directly. So there has to be this middle step. And one thing that helps to fill that middle step, at least going in, seems to be potting soil. This is where we're kind of starting to go to a shift here. Potting soil isn't necessary. A lot of times, here's an example. A nursery. The guy had big contracts. He wanted to take a plant that he knew he could take easy cuttings from, and he wanted to get several thousand of them, ordering small from different vendors to fulfill an order of several thousand, with which he would be his stock that he would the following year and the year after that and the year after that and the year after that begin to take cuttings. That was his modus operandi. So first year, 3 or 4 different vendors. He has all these thousands of trees coming in. At the 6-month point, they start noticing that a couple of tables of them start looking bad. And the longer they go, the more that starts to happen before they really get a handle on it. So then they went through and started noticing that the soil was stagnant. You know, it had been watering it the same amount. They'd been growing and flourishing it and all this other stuff. But the problem was that soil at about 6 months old was breaking down. It had no longer been something that was promoting that biolife. That biolife had already happened, had already eaten everything there was to be eaten in that soil. That soil mass actually, we're not going to use the word soil, we're going to say that potting soil mass actually shrunk. And we've seen this. We've seen this on trees or plants that we've bought that were in potting soil that we've had for 6 months. Everything's going fine. And then all of a sudden they start looking bad. They stop taking up the water that we're giving them. And we start holding back on the water. But that doesn't seem to ever stop this slide. And they always seem a little too wet. They just don't ever quite dry out. Ultimately, they die. You bring them back and they go, yeah, you overwatered your plant. Goes back to that soil we're no longer using. If you were to go to the, whenever we were using soil and whenever we were using sand, basic and the quartz and all of that, even if it had microbes and biobes and all that other stuff and it had that organic matter in it, that was all fine and good. But at a molecular level, that was still little glass balls, little quartz spheres, and that allows for space in between for gas. The gas is needed. The plant's leaves breathe in whatever their atmosphere requirements are. Underneath, they do that also except not as fast. Takes a couple of days to suffocate roots. You can suffocate roots. And the problem isn't water, it's lack of oxygen. Or not lack of oxygen, lack of air. Lack of air. Because let's think about it. If the soil breaks down and it's no longer housing, this little microbial world that was going on inside there, it's basically just shutting down because they've eaten everything. And now you go through and you feed them once or twice and there's a little spike, but the neighborhood's getting kind of ratty, basically. Everything's tearing down. All the fibrous material that it's growing in, instead of silicon-based material, I guess, doesn't allow for the space of atmosphere. It doesn't allow it to breathe back. This place just starts becoming wetter and more toxic, and it starts to shrink as the fibrous material that rots away gets broken down by the microbes, and then they die, and then they get taken up by the tree. But then all of that little root ball is shrinking. You almost feel like the tree is eating the soil. It's not. The microbes are eating the soil, and they're gone. They're going. And they're taking the tree with it, or they're taking the plant with it. It used to be that plants would be in the same pot for years and years and years. You just, when they got root bound, you'd deal with that, and you'd go back with the same soil, everything's fine. But now that we're doing potting soil, you can't really turn that slide around at 6 or 9 months because the system is breaking down. So we're used to seeing trees that do well from the store because those guys at the garden center where it came from really know what they're doing, and we take them home, we put them in the best sunshine, we give them some good water, we give them attention, we give them fertilizer, and 9 months later they die, and then we think that we've lost interest in them, or it's our fault, somehow they died. We couldn't have not known what we were doing. They lasted fine for 6 months, but then by that ninth month something happened, and now they're just not here anymore. That is because we have all entered the rant portion of our program. It's because we've all fallen for this potting soil myth. It's not soil. It should, some of the end story on the grower who was buying plants by the thousands and seeing different tables from different vendors start to go in waves, is he was finding out that their potting soil, that they were all using potting soils of different styles and values, and some of them had more fertilizer in them than others, but they were all breaking down. They were all breaking down before a year, and by a year and a half, they were killing the host. So what they basically did, times their thousands of trees, would be kind of the last thing you would think of. They slip potted everything in sand. Problem solved. When you go to a nursery and you see a company makes this type of potting soil, this type of potting soil, this type of potting soil, and maybe this one says premium, maybe this one says water retaining, maybe this one says blah blah, but then there's going to be some orchid bark, which is just bark, and maybe there's going to be some cactus mix. Who knew the cactus mix is the only thing that has actual soil in it, and that it's sand and rocks? So that's kind of the thoughts behind what my deep dive is on potting soil. Why we like akadama, and bonsai, why people promote akadama. And I'm not really necessarily pitching pure akadama. There's different combinations. In bonsai, we tend to like, you hear I use boon mix a lot. It's a third akadama, a third lava, and a third pumice, I believe. And depending on how much oxygen requirements or how quickly you want the tree to dry out, you would go with larger chunks, granules, or smaller chunks. The bigger the chunks, the bigger the air spaces in between. That would be like my ponderosa. Likes to dry out pretty good in between waterings. Likes a lot of air to breathe down there in those roots. Also, in this deep dive, I've discovered some myths that we have fallen by the wayside. I was always taught to believe that when you see a tree above the ground and you see all of those branches skyward, you are to envision roots going down that far below. I've even preached that because that's what I had always been told. They're saying that's not necessarily the case now. They will go no farther than the atmosphere can penetrate down. So that means for big trees, a couple of feet, and they start running out of air. Remember I said that tree roots would drown in a couple of days. And that's not because of the water, that's because of the no air. If you take a clipping and you want it to root, one of the ways that we would get it to root is put it in a glass of water. But not if we put it in a glass of water and let it sit there. Only if we put it in a glass of water and then change it every day. That keeps it from getting funky and rotting and getting infection, but also make sure that it has a good exchange of oxygenated water every single day. The water that falls from the sky is as much as 23% oxygen. The water that comes out of the tap, they're supposed to supply a guarantee that it's at least, I think, something like 9%. That's what they're, 9%, right? There's also water that's basically dead. You know, if you had a pond and it had no aeration to it whatsoever, life can shut down and nothing could live there. That happens. That's like a dead pool, right? Dead pool. Still, add air to that, start bubbling stuff, and watch life come back in the way of algae, and then in the way of water bugs, and then in the way of this and that, and then somehow fish get in there. I don't know how they. But it all hinges on the oxygen. You know, there are people who grow things hydroponically. Those are roots just hanging out in water all day. The water didn't kill the plant, it's the lack of oxygen. So whenever we have our plants and it's in potting soil and that stuff is all light and fluffy, there's enough atmosphere in there, and it wouldn't have been too long in that trees past that those roots and that soil were all added together with a certain amount of atmosphere all included in there, and the microbes are growing and living and dying, and gases are getting exchanged from, and it's all just going on down there. But whenever all of that's gone and it all just settles together, everything that was going to decompose quickly has already done that and just leaves the muck behind. Your tree's still in that, and it hadn't been that long, and it's probably not the best time to repot. And that's kind of what I see happening a lot of times with people who rely on potting soil, and or people who go and buy plants at nurseries and then expect them to do well a year or so later. I think it would be good advice if you see something that you wanted to keep for a while to come up with your own ideas, do your own research about what a good potting medium is. And a lot of that, I say it that way because with the amount of research I've done, I could go, you do this and you'll never go wrong. That would not be correct for where you live. That would not be correct for your species that you're into times where you live. There are different things that work well for different reasons. So, personally, I find different grades of boom mix, which goes back down to that akadama and that lava and pumice. The lava doesn't soak up water because it's kind of crystalline and it's rock type, but it's full of holes like cheese. It's just keep magnifying it and you'll just keep finding them. But they don't break down. They'll stay just like that forever. That stuff will never break down. Akadama does the same thing. You look at it, to me, that looks like little square, little cubes, like if you break safety glass or windshield glass. And when you look at it close, you see little dots of holes. If you were to magnify it, you would see little dots of holes. And if you were to magnify it more, you'd see little dots with holes. And every one of those can hold a little drop of moisture. And every root that comes along and touches that can shoot out a little feeler down that hole to try to get at that little bit of water in there, and makes fine roots. And just as soon as it swells up, that little pluck of akadama breaks in half. But that's how akadama is used to make roots finer. For me, I find that I overwater trees that are in pure akadama. I need to break that up with something that's going to add more air to the process, because I tend not to want to let them dry out long enough to go. You have to let them dry out longer. That's kind of what I'm saying if you're going with pure akadama. I know 2 pro growers, and they both the stuff they sell tends to be in pure akadama. So, yeah, I don't get away with that. I've not gotten away with that before. I find that going on with some other stuff that's in there that's rocky and stuff, that makes for more opportunity for air exchange. And I'm using air over oxygen because plants breathe in CO2, which is only 3% of the atmosphere, and then exhale oxygen. But whenever I say they need air, they need the atmosphere so they can get that 3% out of. In places where there are landslides and stuff, they do find instances where roots are almost as long as the tree, but again, only if the soil was rocky and broke up and shuffled up enough that the atmosphere was getting that far down. At the point at which insects couldn't live down there, roots couldn't either. That's another way of putting it. If there's nothing for a bug to breathe, there would be nothing for a root to breathe. So they're not going to be any farther down than that. So what is it in the wild that goes on? In the wild, that soil, not potting soil, that the tree is naturally growing in. All right, let's get down to that. From a couple of feet down, that's going to come down to microbes, broken down insect matter, excrement, everything that's going on with them, everything that's going on in the soil wise. It's going to be made up of that. It's going to be a lot of that sand and whatever grade that is, either in sand form or in silt form or in clay form or some of all of that. And then we're going to have a lot of roots in there, but the parts where the action is going to be from there, the 3 feet down to up. And what that's going to be is broken down leaf matter. It's bed of leaves that are the top ones are going to be whole, and then they're going to get smaller and smaller bits as you get down. The soil is going to be full of things that break down all that leaf matter. It's going to be just like little bugs and a little city of life going on underneath there, and all the microbes and all the biobes and all the bioactivity that goes along with all of that, and all the mycorrhiza is going to be down in that. And all of that is going to form this relationship that enables your tree in this case, to take up all the nutrients that it needs to process and live. And what you don't see is the whole thing living in dead matter. There has to be something that'll last. Silicon based, something quartz based in there. Or it would eventually just kind of settle down into its own mush and die, like a bog, like a septic bog, which is what I see a lot of. Think about every plant in the office. It wasn't that, right? Some of them are put in front of a good window. Some of them are actually given a shot of water by one of the 15 people that walk past it every day. And at some point, it's just futile. So I was kind of wondering about that. I was kind of wondering why it is that I nearly killed a wisteria by planting it in potting soil, and it turned into a septic mess that ended up with white flies. And I'm like, I can take that same tree and sit it in a pie tin of water, but I almost overwatered it. What gives? And the difference was akadama. It doesn't turn into a sewage dump. For all practical purposes. And by sewage dump, I just mean something where the pH is wrecked, the ability to sustain microbes is wrecked, the ability to maintain some sort of oxygen atmosphere is out the window, and at this point it becomes starved of everything, and everything just stays a little too wet too long and starts shutting down. You might see this as different colored leaves and start thinking that you've got some deficiencies, because it's going to show all of them. The roots aren't working. They're not, even if there was something, if you just threw some stuff down there for it to eat, if the roots are already on the way out, it's not taking it up anyway. So, yeah, that's kind of why after I shied away from potting soil after the first couple of times of using it on plants that I knew to be water-hungry plants. And when they didn't do well on potting soil, I went, something's up here, because this is California. I can't blame this. I can't blame this on our winters. Frankly, there's things in the field that are doing fine that are, too much for that to be going on here. So that's kind of the spill on it. If a lot of times, if you were to ask the so-called agricultural pros, why don't you come down on potting soil if it works so poorly in the long run? They would tell you that the numbers do not show that. And that numbers, maybe somebody else would point out that numbers don't lie. They don't. They're just awful darn misleading. Those numbers would say that the average person buys a plant at a department store or Home Depot or the local mom and pop nursery, and by the time winter comes, the tree's dead because of winter, because it was a perennial, because they never thought to bring it inside, or because they totally thought they were going to bring it inside and it was a tree. What is the percentages of trees that are purchased by people who want to add color or living things to their house in the spring and the summer, and those things are not alive the following year? A very large percentage. So if it doesn't live long enough for the potting soil to be the thing that killed it, then we might all just come away with going, yeah, no, that was fine. It certainly doesn't weigh 150 pounds the way all those plants that great grandmas did. Jesus, those things could not hardly move those things, and they were old. See, you just told you something right there. Her plants were older because they weren't in potting soil, but they were also heavy. If you're not planning on having it that long, it doesn't need to be heavy, I suppose. So that's the dirt on substrate. Soil is mostly either sand or silt or clay, and to that we add things that help it to retain water, retain oxygen, not retain water. There are places where they add clay to their soil so it'll stay wetter longer. And there are places where they don't like to add clay to their soil because they don't want it to stay too wet too long. Dry climates, they'll bring in clay so that whenever they irrigate, the water will stay there longer. But that's kind of a timed deal, I think, with irrigation. But at the same time, this whole thing that we're doing with basically taking, here's something else, about soil being basically mulch, or maybe we have these, we all have these composts. It's compost, right? So if you see, I've had compost gardens before. I'm not a big fan of them, but I'm not a big fan of them because I had them for a couple of years and I was going, meh. You know, in my case, I went to my backyard. I picked a space where I wasn't going to give up primo sun, but got some sun. There was some grass there. I took a shovel. I took about a 8 by 8 foot path, and I turned over the soil and started throwing my lawn clippings, my garden clippings, and my leftovers in there. And I don't recall ever doing anything with any of that other than feeling like I was doing something worthwhile because the paper had told me, the local papers had all said we should all be doing that. What grew in that? The only thing that would ever grow in that the whole time I was doing that, the only time I ever did that and had that turn into anything, tomatoes would grow in that. So if the ag department is using tomatoes, wow, big red, green, ripe tomatoes on this potting soil, then that's not necessarily indicative of what the world needs out of a substrate. They're just bragging about how big their tomatoes when they'll grow on some of the things that are considered some of the worst. Look into it. You know, tomatoes will grow all kind of places where you wouldn't want to sell them. It's just the way it is. They don't need such great soil to thrive. However, you grow tomatoes in great soil and you'll probably get greater work out of them. I'm just saying that when our ag department uses tomatoes and the size of tomatoes and the color of tomatoes to pick what potting soils are best and worst, they're probably not doing horticulture a world of good in the actual plant world if you have something that you hope to have this time next year or years to come. So yeah, soil, potting soil, and substrate. That's kind of my bit on that. And like and subscribe if you guys have not already. Tomorrow will be a day off and we will go out. It's supposed to be nice. We'll go out on the balcony. I'm going to look for things that might be wrong with our bald cypress trees. No, there's nothing really wrong with them, but we did have a little mishap with some equipment here a couple of weeks ago. And I think if I look hard, I might find a few little limbs or branches that could use some sort of attention, but we're going to go over that and do that tomorrow. So that's going to be Bald Cypress Day tomorrow. Out on the balcony in the sunshine, enjoying all of that. Meanwhile, I think our court bark is looking really nice. I just thought I would set it out here next to us to look good. You just sit there and look good, doll. I got this. Like and subscribe if you guys haven't already. Like I said, our next spot will be Manana when we go out and we do wonderful things, probably with the bald cypress. And then we're probably doing it. We're back. There was nothing too big. We just had a case of the no energy, basically. It kind of ran down. And speaking of back, you guys should check out Aussie Bonsai Bloke, and thank you all for watching. Little baby is just stacked out here. All right, thank you all.